After deciding to marry my boyfriend, Beckett, I was excited to meet his family. I had high hopes for our future together, and I looked forward to making a good impression. On the day we visited his family's home, I was nervous but hopeful. However, things didn't go as I imagined. When I arrived, I was rejected by all his relatives. They made it clear they didn't want anything to do with me, saying, "Don't ever contact us again. We don't want to hear your voice." I couldn't understand why they reacted that way. Perhaps it was because of how they were raised, always being praised for their looks. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law, in particular, were cold and jealous. They seemed to dislike anyone who had something they didn't. Sadly, I became the target of their envy and resentment. My father-in-law and brother-in-law, without much thought, followed along and rejected me as well. It was a painful experience, but I didn't give up. Several months ago, I was finally able to take sweet revenge on them, though in a way that helped me find peace and happiness. My name is Freja, and I'm 25 years old now. Today, I live a peaceful, happy life surrounded by love, alongside my husband, our adorable child, and my supportive parents. But to understand how I got here, we need to go back 3 years, to when I was 22 years old. It all began when Beckett, my boyfriend at the time, proposed to me. Beckett and I worked at the same company, and we grew closer through our shared love of watching movies. We often spent our days off going to the cinema together. Beckett had a calm, gentle personality. He was well-liked by everyone at work because he was kind, avoided conflicts, and was always willing to forgive others' mistakes. I had been interested in Beckett since I first started working at the company, so when he asked me out, I was thrilled. I looked forward to going to work every day just to see him. Whenever I was feeling down or made a mistake at work, Beckett would listen to me, sometimes talking with me all night long to comfort me. Over time, I started to think, I want to be with this person forever. Beckett had big dreams of starting his own business someday, and I wanted to be there to support him every step of the way. So, when Beckett proposed to me, I was overjoyed. I immediately said yes, excited about our future together. The weekend after Beckett proposed, we visited my parents to share the news. Beckett got along wonderfully with my parents. He even bonded with my father over drinks, and my parents were thrilled about our engagement. They quickly gave their blessing, and I felt so fortunate to have found someone like Beckett who fit so well into my family. The following weekend, it was time to meet Beckett's family. He hadn't spoken much about them, so I didn't know what to expect. Beckett lived on his own, and I figured he wasn't very close with his parents. The night before our visit, Beckett mentioned, almost casually, that his family might be a little odd, but told me not to worry. I was curious, but decided to brush it off. The next morning, we met up and headed to his family's home together. I was nervous the whole way there, and when we arrived, I was surprised to see a massive, mansion-like house with an expansive garden. It was clear Beckett had grown up in a very wealthy family, which made me even more anxious. But Beckett, with his usual calm and reassuring smile, told me, "Don't worry, it's going to be fine." His mother was the first to greet us at the door. She seemed kind at first, inviting me in warmly. She was well-dressed, with perfect makeup and elegant hair. Inside, Beckett's father, brother, sister, and their children were waiting. Everyone welcomed me with smiles, and I started to feel more relaxed. Over dinner, we announced our engagement, and his family seemed happy for us. His mother and sister-in-law even commented on how excited they were to have such a cute girl join their family. As we talked, I learned that Beckett's father owned a successful company, and his brother was set to take over in the future. The women in the family were stay-at-home wives, leading graceful lives filled with hobbies like dance and flower arrangement. At first, I was impressed by how nice they all seemed. But then, Beckett's father asked me a question that changed everything. "Freja, I heard you work at the same company as Beckett. Are you a contract employee there?" I explained that I was hired as a regular employee after graduating from university, just like Beckett. I thought it was a simple enough answer, but the atmosphere shifted. Beckett's family, especially his mother and sister-in-law, became noticeably colder toward me after that. I didn't realize it at the time, but they were looking for reasons to judge me. What followed was a series of subtle rejections and cold treatment from the family, which eventually led to their outright rejection of me. But now, years later, I've moved past that pain. I have a beautiful life with Beckett, our child, and my loving family, and I've left that chapter of my life behind. After I graduated from Harvard, my father-in-law couldn't hide his excitement.
Wow.
You went to Harvard? That's amazing. You must be really talented. I'm so proud that someone like you is marrying into our family, he said. Beckett, smiling beside me, added, Freja is incredible. She's hardworking, smart, and quick-thinking. I'm so lucky to be marrying her. Hearing all the praise made me feel a bit embarrassed. But it was true that I had worked hard to get where I was. Attending a top-tier university like Harvard had been my dream. I had studied long hours during high school, often sacrificing sleep to achieve my goals. My parents, who didn't have much money, worked hard to support me through college, and I wanted to make sure I repaid their efforts by achieving something great. I was determined to succeed, not just for myself, but for my parents, who had given me everything they could. As the lively conversation with Beckett and my father-in-law continued, I noticed something. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law had gone quiet, and the warm atmosphere suddenly felt tense. I started to worry that I had said something wrong. Trying to change the subject, I noticed a beautiful flower arrangement on the table. That flower arrangement is lovely. Did you make it? I asked my mother-in-law, hoping to compliment her. But her response was cold and unexpected.
What?
Do you, someone who works at a top company, really care about a housewife's time-wasting hobby? Her tone caught me off guard, and I didn't understand why she sounded so upset. Just a few minutes ago, she had been smiling. Before I could say anything, my sister-in-law chimed in, her voice filled with sarcasm. From your point of view, Freja, with your fancy education, you probably think all us uneducated housewives can talk about our flowers, right? I was stunned. I hadn't meant anything like that at all. I felt a lump forming in my throat, and I didn't know how to respond. Beckett quickly stepped in, trying to defend me. Hey, that's not fair. Freja isn't the type to look down on anyone. Stop it, both of you. His words brought me some comfort, but I still felt uneasy. I couldn't bring myself to apologize, mostly because I hadn't done anything wrong. So, I kept my head down, hoping the conversation would move on. Looking around the room, I noticed that my father-in-law, who had been drinking since noon, had fallen asleep on the sofa, snoring loudly. My brother-in-law, looking bored, was scrolling through his phone, yawning. The atmosphere felt heavy and uncomfortable, and I was relieved when Beckett suggested, maybe it's time to wrap things up. On the way back to the station, Beckett apologized. Sorry about today. My mom and sister have a lot of pride, especially when it comes to education. They're sensitive about the fact that they only graduated from high school. He then told me more about his family. His mother had worked at a flower shop after high school, and his father fell in love with her at first sight. He would visit the shop every day just to see her, and eventually they started dating and got married. My mother-in-law was a stunningly beautiful woman, and customers would visit the flower shop just to see her. Even now, it seemed like my father-in-law did everything she asked. My sister-in-law had a similar story. She reconnected with her high school classmate, my brother-in-law, at a reunion in their early 20s. He was so taken by her beauty that he pursued her relentlessly until they started dating and eventually got married. Like my father-in-law, my brother-in-law also seemed to do whatever his wife wanted. I couldn't understand why my mother-in-law and sister-in-law were so insecure around me. They were beautiful women with doting husbands who clearly admired them. Sure, I had a good education, but I never saw myself as better than them. Still, the tension from that day left me feeling uneasy. I started to wonder, is marriage going to be okay? Despite my worries, both families had given us their blessing, so we moved forward with planning the wedding, hoping things would get better over time. Beckett reassured me, don't worry, Freja. I'll always be on your side. His words helped me stay positive, and we spent the next 6 months preparing for our wedding. Everything seemed to be going smoothly, and I thought we were finally ready for the big day. But just one day before the wedding, everything changed. Beckett's phone rang. It was his mother. I could hear Beckett's side of the conversation, and it quickly became clear that something was wrong. What? Why? We can't just change it. Wait, hold on, he exclaimed, but then the call abruptly ended. I asked him what happened, and Beckett's face was pale with shock. My parents, they said they're not coming to the wedding tomorrow. I couldn't believe it. What do you mean? They're not coming? My mind raced as I tried to make sense of the situation. According to Beckett, his parents had forgotten they had booked a vacation for the same day as the wedding and decided to skip the ceremony. I was completely floored. How could they forget their own son's wedding? And how could they just choose to go on vacation instead? We spent the next hour calling both his parents and his brother, but no one answered their phones. We even drove to their house, but the lights were off and no one was home. As we stood there in front of their empty house, I couldn't help but think back to that tense moment during our first visit. Beckett, do you think her mother and sister were upset with me that day? I felt like the mood shifted after our conversation. I asked. Beckett sighed. I told you before, Freja, my mom and sister have a lot of pride. Smart women can be stubborn sometimes. Maybe they're holding on to a grudge. With a heavy heart, I realized that no matter how hard I tried, I might never be fully accepted by Beckett's family. But as long as I had Beckett by my side, I hoped we could overcome any obstacles that came our way. When I asked Beckett why even his father chose to skip the wedding, he explained, "My dad and brother-in-law, they're both very submissive to their wives. They probably sided with them to avoid upsetting my mom and sister." Beckett said this with a resigned look, and I didn't know what to say. In the end, we couldn't reach any of Beckett's family, even on the day of the wedding, so we had no choice but to go ahead without them. I kept wondering, why did this happen? Did I do something wrong? It was hard to believe that they had simply forgotten about their trip. Even if that were true, how could they choose a vacation over attending their own son's wedding? My parents, who had already arrived at the venue, were shocked when they heard Beckett's family wouldn't be attending. Beckett apologized to them. "I'm really sorry for the trouble my parents have caused." My parents, always kind, reassured him. "It's not your fault, Beckett. Don't worry about it. Just enjoy the wedding." But I could see the complicated expressions on their faces, and I felt awful for putting them in such an uncomfortable situation. During the reception, we could hear the whispers of guests. "Why aren't Beckett's parents here?" some of his friends asked. Even our boss, who had kindly agreed to give a toast, asked, "What happened to your parents?" We had no choice but to brush it off, telling everyone that Beckett's parents weren't feeling well. The day that was supposed to be filled with joy turned into a mentally exhausting experience. A few days after the wedding, Beckett and I went to his parents' house to report on the ceremony. His mother greeted us, as if nothing had happened. "Oh, Freja, it's been a while. How was the wedding? Did you have fun?" "I'm sorry I couldn't make it because of the trip," she said casually. "I meant to buy you a souvenir, but I got so busy and forgot." Her lack of remorse stung. I smiled politely and said, "It's okay. I'm glad you enjoyed your trip," though inside, I was filled with sadness. I couldn't understand why I was being treated this way, but I forced a smile to keep the peace with Beckett's family. Beckett, however, was less forgiving. It's unacceptable to cancel the day before a wedding, especially when all the relatives were absent. Is that even normal? "If you didn't want to attend, you should have said so from the beginning," he said, clearly frustrated. Then, out of nowhere, Beckett's sister-in-law spoke up. "I would have attended if Freja wasn't the bride," she said coldly. "What?" I was stunned. My head started spinning, trying to make sense of her words. Then, as if to back her up, my mother-in-law added, "Don't just blame us. I wanted to see my cute son's once-in-a-lifetime moment, but Freja ruined it. I'm a victim too, and I'd like an apology." I was too shocked to respond, but Beckett stepped in. "What are you talking about? Freja didn't do anything wrong," he said, defending me. That's when Beckett's father, who had been silent the whole time, finally spoke up. "Enough. How dare you come here in the middle of our day off and complain? Is that all you came for? Get out," he yelled at us, his voice filled with anger. We were kicked out of the house, and as I was putting on my shoes at the entrance, I felt a sharp pain in my foot. Ouch! I lifted my foot and saw a caterpillar crawling inside my shoe. Horrified, I ran outside with one shoe on, shaking the caterpillar off. As I did, I heard my mother-in-law and sister-in-law snickering behind me. "Are you okay?" they asked, but their smirks gave away their malice. Desperate to leave, I apologized, sorry for the trouble, and turned to go. But just as I was about to step out the door, my mother-in-law stopped me. "Freja, please don't get involved with us except for weddings and funerals," she said coldly before slamming the door in my face. I stood there, completely bewildered. What had I done wrong? All I ever wanted was to get along with Beckett's family. On the way home, Beckett kept apologizing. "You don't have to force yourself to interact with my family anymore." "I'm really sorry," he said, sounding defeated. The next day, I woke up with intense itching all over my body. I jumped out of bed and rushed to the mirror, only to see that my entire body had swollen up, bright red and covered in hives. The itching was unbearable. I called in sick to work and went straight to the dermatologist. It turned out the caterpillar that had been in my shoe was the culprit. Its stings had caused an allergic reaction, and I spent the next 2 weeks unable to sleep properly because of the intense itching. As I lay there, suffering through the itching, I couldn't help but remember seeing my brother-in-law near my shoes when we first arrived at their house. Could he have done something to set all this in motion? The thought filled me with dread, but I had no proof. It was a painful realization that Beckett's family had gone out of their way to make me feel unwelcome, and I wasn't sure why. But one thing was clear. I couldn't continue to force a relationship with people who didn't want me around. When I visited Beckett's house in the past, I would have assumed that the caterpillar in my shoe was just a strange accident. But by that time, my trust in his family had completely crumbled. A month after that incident, Beckett was hospitalized due to persistent stomach pain. He had been complaining about it for a week, and I was so worried that I forced him to take a day off and go to the hospital. After running tests, the doctor suspected it was a gastric ulcer, and they decided to admit him for further examinations. I knew I wasn't supposed to contact Beckett's family unless it was for a wedding or a funeral, but I felt this wasn't something to keep from them. Mustering up my courage, I called his parents. As the phone rang, my hands shook and I felt nauseous. The moment I heard my mother-in-law's voice, my anxiety spiked. "Hello, it's Freja," I began nervously. "I'm sorry I haven't been in touch, but Beckett has been hospitalized. The doctors think it might be a gastric ulcer, so I thought I should let you know." Her response was cold and dismissive. "A gastric ulcer, huh? Isn't that because you're overworking him? Please don't call me for such trivial matters. I'm busy." I was stunned. Trivial matter? I couldn't believe she didn't care about her own son's health. "Don't you care about Beckett at all?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I don't want to hear your voice," she snapped. "I'll make this clear. I don't want anything to do with you. I'll call Beckett directly if I'm worried about him." Suddenly, my brother-in-law took over the call. "You're too persistent. Learn to read the room. I don't know if Beckett's in the hospital or not, but it's annoying for you to keep contacting us," he said, hanging up abruptly. As the line went dead, I felt something inside me snap. I couldn't believe how heartless they were, rejecting me once again, even though their son was in the hospital. My mother-in-law had clearly told me not to contact them, even in a situation like this. I was done. If they didn't want me to be part of their lives, I would never reach out to them again, no matter what happened. Thankfully, Beckett's condition wasn't serious. After a few days of treatment, the doctors confirmed it was a mild gastric ulcer, and he quickly recovered with medication. I explained everything to Beckett, and with a resolute expression, he said, "Let's stop involving my family in our lives. The only person that matters to me now is you, Freja. If they can't accept you, then they're not my family anymore, even if we're related by blood." A year later, Beckett fulfilled his longtime dream of starting his own software sales business. He had been working hard toward this goal since before we got married, and I was so proud of him. It was still early days, but watching him achieve even a small part of his dream made me incredibly happy. Our happiness grew when, a year after Beckett launched his business, we welcomed a healthy baby boy into the world. My parents were thrilled to become grandparents. Despite the 2-hour journey between our homes, they visited us frequently, and each day was filled with joy. As for Beckett's parents, we didn't tell them about the birth. We figured they wouldn't care, so it didn't matter. We didn't hear anything from Beckett's family until several months later when the COVID-19 pandemic began to spread globally. A state of emergency was declared, and people were urged to stay home. Watching the news, we saw how badly the tourism industry was affected, and I couldn't help but wonder how Beckett's father's package tour company was doing. But then I reminded myself that it was none of my concern. In fact, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction, imagining his father's business struggling. Despite the economic downturn, Beckett's business was thriving. Although there had been some uncertainty at first, we were now earning more than when Beckett was employed at his old job. Things were going well for us. Around this time, however, Beckett started receiving a lot of calls from his parents. He avoided them, not picking up even when he noticed the calls. They left voicemails, but Beckett chose not to listen to them. He had made up his mind not to have any more contact with them. I often told Beckett, "You don't have to worry about me. It's okay if you want to get in touch with them." From my perspective, I despised his family, but I knew they had raised him, and I felt guilty for being the reason he cut ties with them. However, Beckett reassured me, "Freja, I've told you before, you are the most important person to me, not my parents. If they can't accept you, then I can't value them as my family." Hearing those words gave me comfort, but a part of me still felt uneasy. It was hard to completely let go of the family ties, even if they were filled with hurt. But I trusted Beckett's decision and focused on building our life together. We had come so far and nothing, not even his toxic family, could take away the happiness we had worked so hard to create. I felt a mix of guilt and relief as Beckett continued to ignore the daily calls from his parents. Then, one day, a letter arrived from his family home. It was blunt and unapologetic. Our business is on the verge of bankruptcy. We need to discuss financial matters with you immediately. I couldn't believe their nerve. After cutting us off, they were now demanding urgent contact. Needless to say, we didn't respond. Beckett and I agreed that they could face the consequences of their choices on their own. A few days later, while I was at work, I missed a call from Beckett's family. They left a voicemail, and out of curiosity, I decided to listen to it. The message was brief and aggressive. Is this Freja? If Beckett keeps ignoring us, I'll come knocking. Let him know. The audacity was unbelievable. 2 days after that voicemail, Beckett and I were having a relaxed Saturday at home. We had just finished lunch, and were planning how to spend the afternoon when the doorbell rang. I checked the monitor and saw all 4 of Beckett's family members standing at our door. My heart raced, but I kept my expression calm. Beckett came over, saw them too, and let out a long sigh. "You don't have to answer it," he said. "They'll leave if we ignore them." But I had other plans. "It's fine," I said. "They've come all this way. Let's let them in." Beckett hesitated, but eventually agreed. "Okay," he said, unlocking the door. Of course, my initial shock was just for show. I had expected this visit sooner or later, especially after the voicemail. I had a reason for letting them in. I was ready for a full confrontation. As soon as the door opened, Beckett's family barged in without any courtesy. Beckett's mother sneered, "How long does it take to open a door?" Unbelievable. They strutted into the house like they owned it. Beckett's mother immediately spotted our son playing on the floor and, with a confused look, asked, "Whose child is this?" "He's our son," I replied calmly. "But you said not to contact you anymore, so I didn't bother to let you know. I figured you wouldn't care." Her face twisted with contempt as she muttered, "So cheeky." I was secretly enjoying this, knowing I had the upper hand. I turned to Beckett's father and asked, "So, what brings you here today? You should have let us know if you were planning a visit." His father snapped, "Didn't you read the letter? We said it was urgent." "Oh, you mean the letter that arrived 2 days ago?" I asked. "Yes, I read it, but I didn't think it was necessary to respond since you made it clear you wanted nothing to do with us anymore." The tension in the room was palpable. Beckett remained quiet, letting me handle things. He knew exactly how to read the room, and I appreciated his support. His father, however, suddenly changed his tone, pleading, "Look, I'm sorry for the past. But because of COVID, Our business is collapsing. We've had mass cancellations, no new bookings, and if this continues, we're going under. Can you help us out with some money?" I didn't even blink. "I see. That's unfortunate. But no, I can't help. I'm not interested in supporting someone who wanted nothing to do with me. However, if you show me genuine sincerity, I might reconsider." His father's face turned red with anger. "What the hell?" he yelled, slamming his hand on the table. "I'm begging here, and you have the nerve to be smug about it." He tried to intimidate me, but I wasn't scared. I stayed calm and said, "I didn't say you had to beg. You're free to leave whenever you want." Seeing that his threats weren't working, his father's tone shifted once more. "Please, I'm sorry. Help us out." When I still didn't respond, he barked at the rest of the family, telling them to apologize. Reluctantly, all four of them started begging for help, but I remained firm. "No, thank you," I said with a smile. Suddenly, my father-in-law's anger boiled over. He slammed his fist on the table again and lunged at me, grabbing me by the collar. "You think you can act high and mighty while I'm humbling myself?" he shouted, his face inches from mine. I was about to tell him to let go when Beckett finally stepped in. "Hey, Dad, don't touch Freja," he said firmly. His father looked shocked. "You're taking her side? Over your own parents, who are begging for help?" Beckett's voice was calm, but resolute. "Yes, I am. You brought this on yourselves. You can't treat my wife like garbage and then expect me to bail you out. Freja is my family now, and I won't stand for anyone laying a hand on her." Beckett's words seemed to hang in the air, heavy and final. His father let go of my collar, and for the first time, his expression showed defeat. The rest of the family stood silently, their earlier arrogance gone. I realized then that this was the turning point. They had lost all power over us, and Beckett had made his choice. Our life, our family, came first. The four of them shuffled toward the door, without another word. As they left, Beckett put his arm around me, and we watched in silence as they walked away. We both knew they wouldn't be coming back. Beckett replied firmly, "The most important person to me right now is Freja. I can't care about anyone who treats her poorly, even if they're my parents. And I don't need any superficial apologies just for money. If you can't apologize to Freja sincerely, then just leave." That seemed to push my father-in-law over the edge. In a fit of rage, he punched Beckett square in the face, yelling, "Is that how you talk to your parents?" Beckett staggered back, blood trickling from his mouth. Before I could even react, my father-in-law began kicking Beckett, who had fallen to the ground. I screamed, "What are you doing? Stop it," and rushed to pull him off, but he violently shrugged me away, sending me crashing into the corner of the table. My head hit hard, and when I touched the back of my scalp, I felt warm blood on my fingers. The other three, my mother-in-law, brother-in-law, and sister-in-law, stood frozen, shocked by the escalating violence. Meanwhile, my father-in-law, still seething, began ransacking our living room, shouting, "Where's the money?" I scrambled to my feet, ran to the balcony, and yelled to the people passing by, "Help! We're being attacked." Within 5 minutes, the police arrived. As soon as they entered, my father-in-law instantly calmed down and began playing the victim. "I'm sorry for the commotion, officer. I just got carried away seeing my grandson. My daughter-in-law has been acting strange, shouting nonsense." But I stepped forward, my voice steady despite the chaos. "Please arrest this man. He's hit both my husband and me, and he's been destroying our home, demanding money." Suddenly, my father-in-law's facade dropped and he screamed, "I didn't do anything," before punching a hole in our wall. The police didn't hesitate to arrest him on the spot. The rest of the family, my mother-in-law, brother-in-law, and sister-in-law, were also taken in for questioning. Afterwards, my father-in-law was held in jail for some time. Beckett, fortunately, only had a light cut and bruise on his cheek, which healed quickly. I, on the other hand, had a more severe injury. The wound on the back of my head needed 10 stitches. While I felt guilty that Beckett had been hurt because of my desire to lure his family into a confrontation, I was also relieved that their relentless demands for money had finally stopped. It seemed they were now regretting their actions. Later, I learned more about what had caused their cold behavior toward me. As I had suspected, both my mother-in-law and sister-in-law had become jealous of me when they first met me. They had manipulated my father-in-law and brother-in-law into treating me poorly. It turns out the caterpillar in my shoe had likely been my brother-in-law's doing, with my sister-in-law egging him on out of spite. Jealousy, I realized, is a dangerous thing. It can twist people into doing unthinkable things. As expected, my in-laws had no way to recover financially. Their business went bankrupt, and their house was seized. Now they live in a small, cheap apartment. My father-in-law and mother-in-law are both nearing 68, and it's been difficult for them to find new jobs. My brother-in-law, who used to spend his days at the casino, never took his work seriously, and now, at nearly 48 with no real skills, he's struggling to make ends meet, working part-time at a convenience store. As for my sister-in-law, who had always been a stay-at-home wife, she's also finding it hard to hold down a job. Her selfish personality leads her to complain about every job she takes, and as a result, she can't keep a part-time position for long. Now, she's cooped up at home, seemingly unable to move forward. A little while after that chaotic incident, my father retired, and Beckett proposed that we live with my parents. Since I'm an only child, he was concerned about their well-being as they got older. We made the decision to move in together, and it has been one of the best choices we've made. I've returned to work, and my parents take care of our son during the day, allowing me to balance my career and motherhood with peace of mind. Beckett, my loving husband, my supportive parents, and our precious son are everything to me. Life with them is full of happiness, and every day, I remind myself never to take this joy for granted. Through all the trials and challenges we've faced, I've learned to truly appreciate the love and warmth I have now. This is the life I've always wanted, and I'm endlessly grateful for it.